Pro
Are we
e contra.
in pre-World War III, whatever that actually is? Some people have been saying that lately. Are we on a path to World War III? Is the United States and NATO doomed to clash in a major confrontation with Russia? Well, depending on who you ask, and especially if you're listening to voices on both sides of that line, there apparently is a real possibility for this. And listen, this has been one of my concerns from the beginning of this war, all the way back in February 2022, really before that even, is the risk of escalation. The risk that the war was not contained to just between Russia and Ukraine, and that things could spin out of control. An accident could be made, a miscalculation could be conducted by one side or the other, or just some accident causes something to happen that sparks a clash that ends up in a war between NATO and Russia, which all too easily could go nuclear. That was my concern from the outset. Now, once the war got underway, and especially when things started kind of settling into some kind of a normality, as we got into 2022 and the summer parts of it, it seemed like, okay, things are really going bad on the battlefield there, but it seems like the risk of escalation was contained and things weren't going to go bad. There was lots of issues with the U.S. saying, we may give the, our artillery pieces, we may give some offensive weapons and maybe some air defense and then some tanks from modern Western tanks. And everybody was worried, is that going to be the red line? Is that what's going to cause Russia to expand the war? And each time we did that, each time Russia didn't expand the war. They basically sucked it down and continued to fight against the increase. And so the West got a little bit bolder and a little bit bolder. And then it was, the Patriot air defense systems, our premier air defense. Then it was long range missile with Storm Shadow. And then now, apparently any day now, it's going to be F-16s, which is basically the last thing that was ever held back other than the U.S. long range ATACMS missiles. But there already are Storm Shadow missiles from the UK. So everything is on the table, and so far it hasn't escalated. But now then the rhetoric in recent days is starting to escalate. Even the rhetoric is. And we are getting closer to the possibility where an accident could, in fact, spark a larger war. Now, the term that I used at the outset there, this pre-World War III, that's something that earlier today the Polish prime minister said on Polish news. We can pull it up there. Yeah. He warned that we are in a pre-war era as Putin's missiles fire closer to the border of Poland. Now, what happened there, if you haven't seen it, is that Russia right now is in the process of stepping up its offensive operation, not just on the line of contact, which we've been talking about for months here, but now also the air war is expanding. They're using lots of these that they called FAB, 250s to 500s, 1500s, and soon 3000s, which are kilogram weight designations, which are huge bombs. Basically, it's old Soviet dumb bombs that have been equipped with guidance capability to make them precision guided, and they are doing extremely accurate. And because the Ukraine side is running low on interceptor missiles and air defense systems, and Russia keeps knocking them out to include even some Patriot launchers, now then more and more of those bombs are getting fruit. It's knocking out major portions of the Ukrainian ability to have energy. Just the other day, a couple of days ago, I guess, some of these missiles actually flew for a period of time in Polish space, in Polish airspace before landing back in Ukraine. And so there's more and more concern that one of those missiles may go awry or may go errant or may accidentally strike on the Polish side of the border. That was actually on Zelensky's mind when he talked about some of the problems that's having, and his concern also that this escalates and that the U.S. would be involved. Now, he's going to come off here that he's like warning us against this danger, but of course he's saying, because this is a risk, you need to come in now and give me everything I'm asking for. Here's how he put it.
Якщо в Європу, а ракети, як я сказав, вже залітають, якщо в Європу прийде Путін, прийде ця агресія, прийде його армія, солдати Сполучених Штатів, громадяни Сполучених Штатів Америки прийдуть і будуть захищати цю Європу. Бо це члени НАТО. І тому дуже швидко війна може прийти в Сполучені Штати.
One of NATO's senior commanders also said, hey, we have to prepare for war with Russia. Before a big exercise that we conducted, and I think are actually still in the process of conducting now, he came on and said it's time to get ready, as you see there in the headlines, for war with Russia. Now, what's causing all this? Why all of a sudden all this increased rhetoric of talking about fighting Russia? Why would we ever want to fight Russia? And why would we not do whatever it takes to make sure that that doesn't happen? Well, a good bit of the reason comes from what I told you is happening on the ground tactically. Ukraine is losing the war. Well, let me rephrase that. Ukraine has lost the war already. As you've heard Professor Mearsheimer say many times on this channel, as I say repeatedly, not only is there no path to victory, the war is effectively lost already. Now, I know that comes as a shock to many, and there's so many in the West that don't want to hear that, but it's just the flat out truth. By the fundamentals of national combat power, how nations go to war, how nations sustain war, all the fundamentals are irrevocably in Russia's favor. It doesn't matter how much you want to say Russia's at fault, or if you believe that, you know, everything that the West has been saying about how this started and that Putin is evil, which is the narrative. It doesn't matter if you believe all that. It doesn't matter if it was actually true. What matters is what you can do and what you can't do. Russia has every capacity that results in the building of national combat power, and that means air power, air defense, artillery, armor, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery ammunition, regular cannon fire ammunition, engineering assets, drones especially, and all of those things put together. On the most critical point of all is the manpower issue. Russia is adding between 30 and 40,000 troops per month from a recruiting drive that people are willing to sign up for all kinds of bonuses and everything else, but they don't have to have this mobilization. They had one big one in the late 2022 to plug up some gaps and some holes in their defense while they started this mobilization progress. Now it's in full steam here. And of course, as we keep talking about, their industrial capacity is absolutely cranking full steam ahead, 24/7, 365, and it's putting out all the categories of ammunition and weapons that Russia has and will need indefinitely. Ukraine has none of those things. They're on the inferior side in every category. So that means that if nothing is done externally, Ukraine will lose the war on the ground physically. Not that they're trending toward that direction, but that it'll happen. That is scaring many in the West, and they're doing everything they can to avoid that. We keep hearing over and over, Russia must lose. Ukraine cannot be allowed to lose. You hear that from so many Americans right now in this push to try to get the U.S. Congress to fork over another $60 billion. And, you know, they're making claims that is going to be the difference. That's the only reason that Ukraine's not winning. And if we just get that, then that'll change everything, and it won't. Folks, I'm just here to just categorically tell you that is untrue. All that would do is actually delay their loss by increasing the cost in terms of blood and troops killed, cities destroyed, land lost. The longer they go to make a negotiated settlement, the greater the cost is going to be. So perversely, if the Congress gives that $60 billion, it's going to increase the cost of Ukraine to fail and will increase the cost in territory that they have to give up eventually to Russia. It's just not going to work out any other way. Now, some in the West actually recognize this. We actually have, let's see, Viktor Orban in some Polish media today. Gary, if you can throw that one up there. I know it's a little bit out of the order what we talked about. He said that the dominant role of the West is over. And he said, Orban warns that Kiev that without negotiations, there will be nothing left of Ukraine as a country. So he's basically saying the same thing that I just told you. So we're in agreement on that. Then again, this is not some Putin apologist. This is a member of NATO, the head of state of NATO, and he's taken lots of heat from the West because they say, "Oh, he's a Putin lover." No, he's a realist. He looks at the ground, and he's the commander in chief of his armed forces. He knows what can and can't happen on the battlefield. And earlier, within the last year, a couple of times he's really putting more detail behind why he makes this statement now. And it's a little more urgent now. But here's what he said in May of last year.
My position is that looking at the reality, looking at the figures, looking at the surroundings, looking at the fact that NATO is not ready to send troops, it's obvious that there is no victory for poor Ukrainians on the battlefield. That's my position. That was always my suggestion to everybody, that instead of to manage to have a stronger involvement into the war, escalation should be stopped, and we should argue in favor of peace and negotiation.
In December, he went a little bit further and was more emphatic. Peace negotiations or a negotiated end to the war should be prioritized.
Mondjuk ki, hogy az ukrán helyzet rosszul áll. Tehát nem több pénzt kéne küldeni a háborúra, hanem meg kéne állítani a háborút, és fegyverszünet kellene, meg béketárgyalások.
See, and there's just so many in the West that don't want to listen to that. They're like, no, we can't lose to Russia. We've invested everything. We put everything on the line. We can't lose to these guys. I get it. You don't want to. But now then some are trying to peg on to, well, yeah, but the F-16s, those haven't shown up on the battlefield. And as soon as they do, that's going to turn things around. Vladimir Putin, talking to some of his pilots just a couple of days ago, addressed that very issue.
Ну, во-первых, если они поставят F-16, об этом говорят, вроде пилотов готовят, я думаю, что вы это понимаете, как никто другой, лучше других. Эта ситуация на поле боя не поменяет. И мы будем уничтожать их самолеты так же, как уничтожаем сегодня их танки, бронемашины и другую технику, в том числе систему залпового оружия. Но, конечно, если они будут применяться с аэродромов третьих стран, они для нас становятся легитимной целью, где бы они ни находились.
Now, let me tell you why he added that last part there about a legitimate target if those F-16s fly from the airfield in another country. Russia is already, as I told you a minute ago, doing lots of these long-range missile strikes at energy infrastructure and other facilities throughout the entire western Ukraine, even the parts not on the line of contact. One of the other targets that they had here recently was one of the new airfields that has been built in western Ukraine for which these F-16s are supposed to operate. You may not be aware of this, but F-16s are a special kind of aircraft, and you can't just land them on just any old airfield. It's got to be made to specific specifications, because if you do something like maybe some of the MiG-29s that they have had in their inventory, or some of the other aircraft which can take off and land on a more austere airfield, so to speak, the F-16s require a lot more precision, and so they have to have different configurations. So Russia has now bombed at least one of those major airfields, and now then you're going to try to fix it. Well, if you don't have that airfield, you can't fly the F-16s unless you launch from Poland or from Romania or from some other NATO country and then fly it into it. Putin is saying categorically, if you launch from a NATO country airfield, that's going to become and then attack Russian troops, that's going to become a valid target. Now, some in the West say he doesn't mean that, and maybe he doesn't, because if it does, then you have the potential for a genuine Article 5 issue, and then, of course, then again, the war could spread out, and that's the big risk. So you have this situation growing to where you're going to find out who's going to make the big brash talk and who's not going to follow through with it. Do we want to gamble that Putin doesn't mean that, and that he wouldn't really attack a NATO airfield if a NATO airfield is used to launch fighter aircraft to attack Russian troops and Russian soldiers? Or is Putin willing to gamble that NATO won't take that step, and so he's going to put his name on the line to say, hey, if you do this, that I'm going to follow through and knock it out. So both sides are putting their name on the line, and we have to worry. I worry a lot. Is one side or the other going to put the other in a position to either have to back down or make good on their threats? Because that is how you get into an escalation. That's how you get into a war potentially between NATO and the United States. And I'm telling you, that is in nobody's interest at all. And adding more problems to this is the fact that the Ukraine side is getting weaker and weaker, bringing this moment of potential crisis coming to a head quicker. The new commander-in-chief, General Syrskyi, went on the news, and I think it was on Friday, and said that, listen, as it turns out, we don't need as many troops as we thought we did. because actually, we did some calculations. And then we see this video from yesterday from some of the new recruits in Ukraine. Just take a look at this. Tell me if this looks like, some of the new recruits that are going to go fight a wars. If this looks more like a high school bus of kids going on some kind of field trip or something. I mean, these kids keep getting younger and younger. There's talk of going as low as 18 years old. Because they just don't have enough men. As I think I've mentioned, I did a debate with John Mearsheimer at the Council on Foreign Relations yesterday in New York. And one of the things he pointed out was, he said, there are now, by some estimates, more military-age males outside Ukraine than there are inside of Ukraine. I'm talking about Ukrainian men. There are more of them have fled the country and are outside than are now inside because they view this as a death threat. And look, and Zelensky was in the same article or the same interview where he was talking about how he, wants the U.S. to come to his rescue and to give him, the money, etc. He admitted that he's actually running out of a certain kind of ammunition.
We have almost no artillery remaining.
Last month, you said if we have American support, we will win. If we don't have American support, we will lose.
It's true.
Okay, what's also true that he didn't say there, and this is a fact that Professor Mearsheimer and myself both emphatically made in New York yesterday, it won't matter if you get the ammunition. It won't matter if you get the money from Washington. It's never going to be enough. Russia is going to produce somewhere between 3 and 4 million rounds of artillery ammunition this year. By some estimates, even higher. The best case scenario is that the entire West together will produce between 1.2 and 1.5 million shells. And those disparities will continue to grow farther and farther apart over time. And that's just one category of stuff. Russia has the ability to make and to repair all of their armored personnel carriers, their tanks, artillery pieces, the domestic capacity to do that. Ukraine doesn't. They have to ship their stuff off, and sometimes it never gets back. Oftentimes they have to cannibalize whole vehicles to try to get other ones up because they can't get the supply parts, or they can't get them to the depot. All of these things degrade their combat readiness of what they do have. And then, of course, you add in the drones, the electronic warfare. Every category shows Russia in the lead and growing stronger and stronger. Victor Orban is right. John Mearsheimer is right. What would the most sane thing that we could do is to seek a negotiated settlement right now before Ukraine has to physically lose the war. If we keep going on, if we keep blinding ourselves to these just almost concrete realities about how combat power is made and how nations fight wars and how historically nations lose wars, everything is screaming, all the red lights are flashing that Ukraine is coming close to its last legs. They may actually break as an army somewhere, and Russia has strategic reserves that they haven't even employed yet. More offensives are alleged to come. All of these bombings that I'm talking about throughout the country in the energy sector are almost certainly preparation fires for a big push to come soon. Because every time they knock out these electric grids and these facilities to generate electricity, it means that Ukraine, even as little equipment as they can make in factories, it's going to be less because they can't run the machinery. They ran out of electricity for that. It's not just inconvenience. It's that their war-making capacity is being seriously gouged. Ukraine doesn't have the air defense to stop. It's just going to continue on week after week, and sometimes even day after day. If we wait, the chances are that, of course, more Ukrainians are going to die every day, but that they may buckle and break. But at some point, it's just inevitable, physics being what they are, that's going to be the inevitable outcome, because there is no path, whether they get this $60 billion or not. Nobody is even addressing this on the West. All these people who are saying so much about how much they want this money, they don't tell you, here's how that money will reverse all those categories I just told you about. Friends, if you cannot, on the other side, make an argument that says, here are the disparities in artillery, air defense, engineering support, drones, electronic warfare support, all those and many others. If you can't say, here's how we overcome all of those inferiorities for the Ukraine side and neutralize the Russian benefit in every category, then you cannot justly say that this money will make any difference at all. Now, I know how war is done. I fought in 4 combat deployments myself, to include tank-on-tank warfare. I was a second in command of an armored cav squadron in the 1st U.S. Armored Division. I was in the modernization program, the Future Combat Systems at Fort Bliss, Texas, where we were designing the future of the armored force. Look, I've been there. I've done it. I've trained people to do it. I know how combat power is built and how it's used on the ground in battle. And I cannot more emphatically tell you there is no path to Ukraine now, even to hold what they've got. So the longer we wait to do the right thing, the more it's going to cost. And the bigger the risk that we do see an escalation of the war, that we do see some accident or miscalculation, or like France and say, actually, we're going to go ahead and send some troops into Western Ukraine and help on the ground. And then everything bad is possible from that point. Everything bad continues to stay alive as long as we refuse to acknowledge reality and to do what's right. And we risk everybody's security. And we continue to risk the first bill payers are the Ukraine people, the Ukraine territory, the Ukrainian cities. They're the first bill payers for all of our unwillingness to acknowledge reality. I can blame the Ukrainian leaders, and I do, because they have the actual decision-making power over this and could just call it off in a day. But we're not far behind that, because without our support, then they couldn't continue on with this, and then they would have to seek a negotiated solution. It is in our best interest, it is in Ukraine's best interest to end this war as soon as possible, so that we get the risk of World War III off the table. That's what we need to do, folks. That's what's at stake here. That's why this is so important. It's not just a matter of whether the U.S. should or shouldn't give money to Ukraine, whether we don't want to look bad. That doesn't even matter anymore. That's so far down the list, it doesn't even worth anything, because what we need to do is make sure we don't stumble into a bigger war. And that is your deep dive for today. Thanks for listening. I ask you to like and subscribe and share this with your friends, because we're unintimidated and uncompromised, and we're never going to stop bringing you the truth, and we're never going to stop telling the truth about what's going on out there, so that you can hold our leaders' feet to the fire. Send your representatives this video. Just you find out what their address is and what their emails are. Send this stuff out there. Tag it onto their social media. And when they start talking all this nonsense about the 60 billion is going to make a difference, tag this video on there and tell them graphically why that's untrue, because other people are going to see it too. That's how you can expand your voice as well. So we ask you to do whatever you can to give us all a chance to avoid World War III. And that is your deep dive for today. Thanks. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe.